Casual Magic has been sponsored by Quiver, maker of the Quiver and Bolt deck cases and other fine deck holding accessories. Use the code CASUAL on their website for 10% off your order. We're also sponsored by Architect, the premier site for hosting your decks on the internet. I love them and they love me, and it seems like a good reason for you to use them. You can also support Casual Magic directly by going to our Patreon at patreon.com/ShivanB. And now, on with the show. Hello and welcome to Casual Magic, the show where we talk about the fun side of magic together. My name is Shivam Bhatt, and Casual Magic is brought to you by Architect and Quiver and my patrons at patreon.com/ShivanB. I said that slower because my mother-in-law told me to. Today, I'm really stoked because you guys might have noticed I've been doing a series of mini subsodes on like cool book authors, and just because I feel like talking to them, and I've talked to like most magic people already, but today I've got a crossover. I'm talking to R.R. Virdi, who's wrote one of the most like just really well-regarded debut fantasy novels a few years ago, and then book 2 just came out in December of 2024, or like I don't know, sometime November 2024, whatever. And we'll talk about this in a second. They're like gigantic doorstoppers. Like I have yet to finish it or start it because I was just reading Tad Williams' last book, which is also a gigantic doorstopper, and then Brandon Sanderson's last book, which is also a gigantic doorstopper. So I have had now, like, I am 8,000 pages of fantasy deep, and so I'm taking a breather and reading like pulp crime novels from the 20s, because sometimes you just want to see a detective, I don't know, shoot a criminal and solve a crime, and people be like, oh, wow, we got rid of the corruption in office. What a cool idea. Hi, dude. Thank you so much for joining me.
Hey, thank you for having me. It's great. And I'm guessing you're reading some like Philip Marlowe now, Raymond Chandler stuff?
I'm reading Raymond Chandler, who did the old like Maltese Falcon and like... Yep. Yeah, he put out a compilation.
Big Sleep. Yep.
Yeah. You should move your mic to be a little closer to your face.
Oh, yep. Okay, cool.
Yeah. Basically, yeah, there was a compilation put out for the Tales of the Continental Op, which were his old short stories that he did for this magazine called The Black Mask. And it rules. It's just like, oh, I'm just a random schlubby detective in San Francisco in 1920, and here's a bunch of people doing dumb criminal things. And I'm like, this is great.
Right.
Yeah. I don't know. After like a few years ago, like last year or something, there was a magic set called Murders of Carlo Manor, which basically was like a detective set. And in that set, like the heroes kind of go around and they're trying to detect, like solve mystery or whatever it is. But that got me reminded that I really love pulp mystery novels. So I was like, I haven't done that. Like I haven't really deep dived into reading like old crime stories. So I did, which is cool. But you are, let me drag it back away from me for a second, because like people listen to my show and they're like, oh yeah, you just tell the same stories over and over again. I'm like, look, dude. But yeah, as of recording, I just came back from Canada. I was at the pre-release for Aether Drift, which is a set that I worked on. I got to consult on because it takes place in Kaladesh, or now Avishkar, the Indian plane of magic. And I'm very glad that they called at least an Indian guy. They called multiples of us, but it was nice that they like, hey, you can help us do this, right? And we changed the name from Land of Black People to Invention, and I think that's a much better upgrade.
Yeah.
But the set ruled, the pre-release rules. You can see it all on Loading Ready Run's website. Anyways, dude, the reason I wanted to talk to you is because it is very rare in the West, almost unheard of, for there to be like a huge fantasy author who is also a Desi guy. And as a huge fantasy reader who's a Desi guy, I'm like, oh, this is a perfect time for me to do some affirmative action and call my brotherhood and bring you up here and hype you up. Because, dude, I want to see more brown people writing books, dude. We all grew up here. We all read these same damn D&D books and like Tad Williams and Robert Jordan's and whatever the world.
Salvatore with
Salvatore, exactly, and the old D&D novels and everything. Maybe for once we don't have to be Haji. Maybe we can be Johnny Quest instead, right?
Yeah,
Or
yeah.
John V. Quest. But yeah, dude, I'm super stoked. It's weird. It's weird. It's rare that a debut novel is going to be like a 10,000 page gigantomancer. Do you want to maybe tell the people who you are and what you wrote and how you got here?
Yeah. So my name's R.R. Virdi, and I'm predominantly a SFF author, so sci-fi fantasy. I actually started self-publishing in 2013 with urban fantasy because I actually grew up with similar stuff to you. Like I actually loved the pulp urban detective novels. And
Okay, we are going to need to move your mic over because, like,
okay, yeah.
Or you're going to need to sit closer to it.
It's fine. I grew up with, like you, in a lot of ways with the pulp urban like detective novels. I grew up with a lot of Philip Marlowe, Spencer novels because my mom liked them in India.
Yeah.
A lot of that more mainstream Western novels were more accessible than like the niche SFF novels. So I grew up with that. And when I first started self-publishing, I started with urban fantasy because it was the synthesis of, you have sci-fi elements with the detective elements.
Right.
And I eventually started going, well, I wanted to write this epic fantasy because I hadn't seen any Desi fantasy yet.
Right.
And I'd started rereading Wheel of Time again and all these epics. And I'm like, I haven't seen like us have a equivalent to a new Mahabharata or like Lord of the Rings in terms of where that was a secondary world. Like that's not Britain, but it has the British like culture in it. It has the traditions of the Kalevala, the Finnish epics, the Norse epics, including some beats he took directly. He wanted to reimagine them just with a British light.
Right.
I'm like, why don't we have that for South Asia? And I was like, well, can I do a secondary South Asian Silk Road epic fantasy? Because
dude, you're just saying like all the keywords I love. Like
yeah,
Silk Road, South Asian. I mean, like, now it should be noted, there were a few people who've tried this. Like Ashok Banker wrote that weird Ramayan retelling, and I did not like it at all.
Yeah, there was a few retellings, and I was like, why do we have to retell our myths when everyone else went like, I could take aspects of and then create something new, or and have enough of the familiarity where at least Desis could see it and have some pride. Because I did want enough overlap where someone reads my book, they go like, okay, I understand what that is. I have references to real food and cultural stuff. I have actual recipes in there, not by measurements, but enough of the main ingredients you understand. If I'm doing like the rasgulla drink where you have like the rose syrup and like the shave ice and familiar things like a mango lassi.
Yeah, exactly.
And or nods to certain deities. Like I don't have Brahma, but I have Brahm.
Yeah.
One letter off, and he's serving the same creator deity role, but I made him a solar deity instead because at that time I'm doing pre-Hindu, so Vedic, more inspired of our mythology.
What's your book called?
Oh, the first book is the first binding, and the second one that just came out last fall is The Doors of Midnight.
Yeah, I saw them in the bookstore, and I'm like, these are like 10 inches of book.
They're big.
Yeah, and I'm like, I love that. I love that for you, and I love that for us, and I love that for the community. I mean, like, we should mention, for instance, there have been a history of like pulp and sci-fi stuff in India. It's just weird and hard to get. And then there was Samit Basu in like the early 2000s and mid 2000s, who is just this phenomenal Bengali writer, or Bengali. He's from India, not Bangladesh, but he writes, his books are so sick, and they're also like very Western fantasy, but like with our cultural traditions. So like his dwarves are like Vamanas, I'm like, what a clever idea. I never would have thought of that. That's so smart. Yeah, I don't know. I thought it was hella sick. Because like, and I'm just going to rant for 10 seconds here. Is like, we see Hindu cultural traditions be taken all the time by D&D or by D&D-esque things. Rakshasas
or
show
anime.
Up. Yeah, anime. Well, I mean, anime does like weird things to it. And
Avatar: The Last Airbender, the whole concept is South Asian. The title, Avatar,
I mean, Avatar: The Last Airbender is literally like a white man's take on a Buddhist man's like take on Hinduism. Like, it's like, because like the Buddhists are all the good guys and the few Hindus are like crazy weirdos and they're like in season 3. Anyways, I have a whole rant about that one. Don't even get me started. But I'm so excited to talk to another brown nerd. You have no idea. But like we see things like, D&D taking Rakshasas and turning them to cats, or like Nagas showing up all over the place, or just like, we have a huge cultural history of monsters and myths and legends and cool things that are cool and can be shared in a way that's not just like, mocking. And exactly. I'm like, dude, why, if we can use elves and stuff from Western fantasy, why can't we use like, our own like devas and devatas and whatever? It's like
our culture is so broad. Like South Asia encompassed so much that like just the regional mythology changes. Like Bengal had its own dragon culture, like a nature deity dragon, a horned serpent that was a nature god completely removed from Nagas, that had its own name called Brankbang. Just a different level of that. There we have analogs of some creatures that are older in South Asia than the rest of the world. So most people don't know this, but there's something called Panchtantra, which is called the 5 treatises, which are a collection of essentially the earliest folk tales and fables that we found in the world.
That's how I know you're Punjabi, man. Panchtantra instead of Panchatantra.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, like the extra A too, like that's such an American thing. Like when you see the names, like his name is Karan, but they spell it Karna. And I'm like, what? Where's the A? But that's a whole different thing.
Well, that's because in the North, we cut the A's off, but you go to the South and it's like they just like we say, Ram, and they're like Rama.
Yeah.
Come on, man. Arjuna. Yeah. It's like, okay, dude. Okay.
What most people don't know is, and they can look this up, is that there was actually a rabbi who translated Panchtantra into German in the 1400s, which means for 400 years, it was one of the most widely read translated works in Germany before the Grimm brothers ever wrote their fairy tales. And more now scientists are discovering that the Indian folk tales were some of the earliest ones that contributed to some of the tropes and beats that they understand. The 2 oldest iterations for fairies, example, are actually the nymphs and the South Asian Apsara. So for those who don't know, in South Asian culture, we have our own versions of what you would consider like a celestial, very seductive, temptive, magical woman who usually they have singing and dancing and musical arts. And a lot of times what they would be really known for is seducing a sage. Because if you're immortal and you want to achieve magical power, part of that would be the idea of pursuing chastity. Like I'm focused just on myself. I'm not chasing girls.
You meditate a lot. You focus. You internalize. You have no distractions. And Indra, the king of the gods, is very unhappy and generally not keen on people trying to attain
that power.
And so he sends his apsaras, his dancing girls, and his like divine beauties down there to go and let's say encourage the sages to explore some extracurricular activities. And every time they'll be like, "Oh no, I got laid and have no magic anymore." And it's like, well, bro, keep it in your pants, and maybe
one of the oldest archetypes that we also see in the Odyssey, where Odysseus is being tempted by Calypso or Circe. And part of this series, the goal was to show that in the West that there's this whole iteration of repetitive tropes and beats that they might be familiar with as the hero's journey just in the West, but they don't understand that they originate sometimes from older storytelling techniques in the East. That we had the exact same thing. Like that beat is called meeting the goddess and also the temptress. Usually the idea that the hero has to overcome some kind of temptation. And a lot of these end up back in my novel more as a way for me to both be referential with storytelling and also do like a meta-analysis and comparison. So how do you do a storytelling about storytelling? Because Tales of Tremaine is done in a way based off a technique that comes from India called the frame narrative. So our oldest epics are done in a way where first they're hymnal, because Sanskrit is a very musical oral-based language, and the stories were performed with nesting stories inside. So sometimes these will be metaphorical. They may be a lesson inside of a story or a lesson inside of a lesson, a way to teach something. But the technique usually has a form of circular storytelling where something might come back around.
My favorite example of this is the Ramcharitmanas, which is my personal scripture, which Tulsidas wrote as a lengthy narrative poem in the 1600s. And it starts with Tulsidas narrating this story of Ram to the sages. And inside, the first thing he does is he nests the story of the sage Yagnavalkya telling the sage Bharadvaj the story of Ram. And then Yagnavalkya is telling Bharadvaj the story of Shiva telling Parvati the story of Ram. And so you've got this deep, deep, deep narrative that all the way at the end, he pulls all the way back. And like, and it's weird because the thing is written in couplets, in narratives. There's no like character transition or anything, except every now and then he will say like, "Oh, Bharadvaj replied to Yagnavalkya that this and that." But it's like while you're singing it, going through and listening to the story, it is wild how this thing is so absurdly long. And the fact that it was orally passed around and you have to sit there and think, how are you keeping track of who the characters that are telling the damn story are? And it's genius. It is one of the most creative and like impressive poetic feats in human history.
I actually wrote a love letter to the technique of that. So in chapter 10 in book 1, titled Brahm, this is already in the nesting story. Adult Ari is telling his past story, so there's one layer deep. That young Ari is now reciting essentially this world's version of the creation myth. So he's telling the story of Brahm. But in it, some readers caught this. Not all my editors did not. It took them forever. I had to show them once a reader found it. But if you actually go through, there are sections with rhyming couplets and quatrains, but it's told in what looks like a normal verse format. But if you in prose format, but if you actually go back and delete the normalized prose and just leave the rhyming couplets and quatrains, the entire chapter becomes an epic poem that works perfectly in that order. So it's a love letter to the techniques that we used to have of like the actual rhyming couplet and quatrain structures, the hymn. So it's actually then the chapter is literally an epic poem, and you can delete out the normalized verse. I mean the normalized prose,
dude.
And
how are you going to tell me you wrote like a gigantic epic fantasy and then put everything in there? Like, really, that's kind of a little. That's a little much, isn't it? It's kind of crazy. Damn, dude. Like, because I am also a folklorist. I love this kind of like history and retelling and stuff. And that was one of the big things I used to do on Twitter is like, tell a lot of these stories. And I just think that there's such a wealth of things to draw from. And there's such a lot of because think about how many times have we seen the Christ myth retold over and over again? And it's like, it's fine. Like, the man comes, sacrifices himself and, salvation, whatever, any number of these iterations. Like, there are so many stories that we can retell without like, I think one of the problems
we have Gulki.
Gulki is, I have thoughts on Gulki. Gulki is a little like, hey, if everybody else has one, we should have one too.
We should have one too, yeah.
I'm like, look, the Zoroastrians had theirs, but like, Gulki is, like, every time I see like a Gulki thing that's like a robot horse or something, like, you guys are trying way too hard. This is a little, we don't need an apocalyptic myth. It's fine. But like Narsima or like, Prahlad story or any of these other like just really famous stories. And I think it's super cool to have callbacks to and drawbacks to and drawn like lessons from. But one of the problems I run into in the West is that a lot of people don't, they just take the whole story and not like the essence of the story.
Yeah.
And then it's like, and you see things like them, they turn the gods into toys or into like silly. I'm like, dude, if you can take the beats of the story without disrespecting the culture that you're taking the story from, like it's very, very doable. And that was one of the things that they ran into in the original like Kaladesh set in Magic was like they had for instance one of the planeswalkers, dude named Johnny, is a big lion man, and in that set he's taking the oath of the Gatewatch to join the party of the good guys to fight the bad guys, the superhero. But he sits there and he is shown in a picture with his hand upraised like this, and he's got this mace over his shoulder. And I was like, if I took that big picture and hung it in my mandir at home, Mom would be like, wow, that's a beautiful Narsima. And I'm like, dude, if this had been in any other set, it would have been neat. In the Indian set, it's a little on the nose.
Someone just Googled, big
Oath of Johnny's like a little, like every time I show an Indian person that, they're like, oh, that's cool. Did a Hindu draw that? I'm like, no. But like they do have like callbacks to the story though. There's like a scene of called like a heroic intervention. There's this card where basically Johnny jumps out of this column with this big net to grab this guy who's about to hurt the good guys. I'm like, look, there's a way you can call back to the Narsima story without having a deity with his hand upraised. And I'm like, there's ways to do it that are cool. And it's super fun.
There's so many other kinds of archetypes and characters they could choose that are like lesser known, like the idea of Kindeva. Like we have our own idea of beings that are semi-immortal, almost close enough to the gods, but they're not like the way you would have more idea of a demigod. I mean, we do have the same role of that too, but we have things like that, or the Chiranjeevi we have.
The seven immortals.
Yeah. We have all these different archetypes of good, evil, demigods, things in between, multiple different kinds of vampires, shapeshifters, good and bad, of all variety and range. Kanaras, bird people, horse people, all
the things you can find in Greek mythology, you can find in ours as well.
Yes, exactly. Yeah,
like
it's just as wide and diverse.
Yeah, and it's crazy. Surprised. It's like it's just there's so much. I don't know. One of the things that irritates me is sometimes folks are like, oh, you're such a scold. You're trying to stop us from using this. And I'm like, no. I want to share all of this with you.
Yeah.
Like, you have no idea. I am overflowing. Do it right. I'm just like, look, we've got all these stories. They're super cool. Let me tell them to you. However, there's some things you just maybe I think in the podcast I did with Loading Red Run, I was like, you don't need to walk on eggshells, but some eggs you should leave in the carton. Like
that's well said. Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
Like it's okay. Like we could go through and we can take these stories and remake them and bring them to the West. But like maybe you don't need to have a 4-armed blue guy who's got an elephant head, like or whatever, right? Like it's cool. Yeah. There's ways we can do this that explore and celebrate and like draw from without being doofy.
Yeah, and that's kind of been like my ethos. Like the story that a buddy and I had nominated for the Nebula was drawn off of that, and it was, what if someone had written Pacific Rim right? And what I mean by that is, one thing we had a problem with is whenever aliens come to Earth, they always attack America. But if an alien came to Earth, the first thing they would do is look at like population mass, and that would be, well, China and India together, that region is the biggest threat by sheer population number of who could fight back. So they would attack there first. So our world has like, what would happen if India made the Jaegers first? And we actually did a pilot program where in our world they realized, well, first of all, humans are too squishy to be inside these things. Like if a mech's getting battled around, the human's going to die. So eventually they start uploading human consciousness as an AI into the mech. But the problem is the human brain can adapt to stress by eventually, you have PTSD. Your chemicals go out of awry, the brain starts taking trauma. AIs can't have that. So what happens to an AI? And we had something called fragmentation. So we have these giant Desi pilots and these mechs that are sort of built to resemble the idea of the gods. Now, like these new Jaegers are deified, and we have one built off of Vishnu, who sort of resembles the idea. He's just blue painted to be the blue preserver, but that's it. But what happens when this AI starts going through stress? It starts believing it's Vishnu because the actual crew starts worshiping it because it's become the protector. And the Indian culture where we still, even today, there's a lot of people who might deify or you'll bless a new car. But this thing is now tangibly protecting these people. So they're like, this is like now our new Vishnu. It starts believing it, and it starts. Its psyche is almost like fragmenting between the soldier it was, and now the role it's been forced to do.
I need to read this story, man. That sounds
I can send you a free little copy, yeah. And then it's this final fight of this thing going against like this grade 5 kaiju of what happens when Vishnu believes like it's got to now die because it is Vishnu to preserve them. So it's viewing these people now almost as insignificant little humans, but it's my job as their god to protect them. Yeah, I'm going to die as God.
It's funny that you bring up like the kaiju because like if you look at, we even have like kaiju in. I mean, okay,
we do. We do.
I don't want this to become look, India had everything first stuff because that's very easy to do. But
Vitra, he becomes a 3-headed monstrous dragon that can take up all the water of the world. That's like Ghidorah stuff.
Like the Kuruma avatar, the turtle avatar, or the boar. The boar avatar is actually the best one. They like becomes a giant, huge boar who's fighting against another monstrous Rakshas on boar, and they're just going to battle. And just
Makara, the giant oceanic sea dragon crocodile.
Or like when Hanuman becomes Super Saiyan and goes and fights against like the demons of the sea and stuff like that. It's like, it's crazy. There's so much superheroes. Like there was a short that Pixar had done called Sanjay's Super Team that they put out a long time ago, which was in front of The Good Dinosaur. So nobody ever saw it because nobody saw The Good Dinosaur either. But Sanjay's Super Team was done by this artist who also did a really cool Ramayana. Hang on, let me get his name. It rules. It was done by Sanjay Patel, who is a Pixar animator. And he did a fantastic, by the way, cartoon version of the Ramayana that my kid still loves. But yeah, so in this kid is basically watching these cartoons, and his dad is doing pratna in the mandir behind him, and he's doing his like pujas and whatever. And suddenly, like Hanuman and Ram and Vishnu come out and are like superheroes and do this. I'm like, oh well, yeah. We grew up with we didn't need Marvel because we have literally just read the Mahabharata, right? Like Krishna goes and fights this guy, splits him in half, and throws him back together again. And I'm like, I could totally see a cartoonist drawing that.
I mean, Grant Morrison did his version, I think, of Mahabharata called Avatar X. He did his own comic run.
I have a statue of Ram from there was a comic that was done for like Ramayana 2012 or something like that. That was just like this really cool.
That is cool.
Yeah, it's like, oh man, who did that one? Hang on a second. Sorry, I'm just like looking this up, but it doesn't matter because I can't find it because like Christ knows what these things were called. It was just like, it was a really cool comic book of just this amazing picture. And then the Western people put out this cool model of Ram. And I'm like, okay, I'm going to just get that. And I just stuck it in my mandir and it looks sick. People are always like, man, what do you think of the Shin Megami Tensei series? I'm like, Well, I've got their Shiva statue, so it looks really cool.
That's something fascinating too. So I don't think people get that like Japan does have I don't want to say like the best understanding of Indian culture, but they do have an understanding of it because people don't realize in the West that Buddhism brought a lot of Indian culture to Japan. Like Indra is worshipped there. He's understood. There are elements of Indian dance actually incorporated into the national Japanese folk dance because they were brought there by a monk Bodhisena.
When I lived there and I went to Nara, which is where the big giant Buddha shrine is outside of Kyoto, there's a huge temple bell that's out front of it. And on that temple bell is literally Krishna with a flute. So it's like, the trade back and forth through China and through India brought a lot of like cultural tradition.
Oh, yeah. And the people in the West
like Shravana from Kubera and everything. And like I went to the Sanju Sangendo Mandir in Kyoto, and it was literally 1,001 statues of Saraswati, and it was just like it was really really cool. But it's like the Japanese style of Bodhisattva, and it's sick. It's super sick to be in there.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's I don't know. I think that the time has finally come that our diaspora kids have finally grown up here in the States and are able to break away from having to be computer engineers so we can start writing and telling our stories again. And you're seeing a lot of like cool young adult stories that are written by Indian people or South Asians and like children's books, young adult books. So it's about time that we're getting like actual adult fantasy novels that are just like, also, dude, I'm telling you, reading Samit Basu, his Simiquin Chronicles is sick. So good. And also like really the other books he writes. But sometimes though, like, Indian pulp stuff gets a little Indian, a little pulpy, but it's fine. It's whatever. But you and I started actually talking like earlier this year that your girlfriend was getting into magic.
Yes, yeah,
which is the excuse I used to bring you on here. Also, nice freaking Game of Thrones banners, buddy.
Oh, thank you. Yes. Big fan of that series. Yeah.
You know what? Like, I got tired of waiting for George R. R. Martin, and then the TV show sucked so badly that I was like, I think I'm good.
That's fair enough. I know a lot of people that felt that way. Yeah.
Yeah. But anyways, yeah. So, wait, so you grew up here in America, right? Or did you grow up in India?
No, I was born and raised here in Virginia. Yep.
Cool. Yeah. There's a lot of brown people there.
Yep. Northern Virginia. Yep.
Yeah. Like, my cousin lives close to DC, so
that's exactly where I'm at, close to DC. Yep.
Yeah, turns out that where all the doctors are and all the government things are and all the nerds go and hang out there.
Well, that's exactly what it is. I'm like the one non-doctor Indian here, or non.
Yeah, right. Like, how is that allowed?
No. My neighborhood is like that's exactly what it's all like. South Indian doctor, whatever, works at Google or Amazon.
Hey, at least you got published, so your parents can go to a store and point to something that you did, right?
That is the flex that they're now making. Is like, yes, well, it's like your kid doesn't have something in a store.
Yeah, your kid doesn't have
until that happened.
It was,
yes, exactly. Now that's their flex back against the doctor kids. Yes.
Yeah, let me tell you, my parents are like, my son's on a magic card, and everybody's like, what the hell does that mean? And it's like, yeah. Dude, when I showed my dad my first magazine article for EGM that I'd written, and I was like, look, my name's in the paper. And he's like, I don't understand what this is, and I don't read English, so what do you want me to do with it? And I'm like, you've been in this country for 40 years. Give me a break.
Right. Yep. That's the typical Desi response. Like, I did something amazing. It's like, is it in one of these three narrow fields? No? Okay, then I don't care. It's like,
right. It's like, will you be able to pay for my retirement? No.
Yeah.
Will my neighbors back home in India look at me with honor?
Oh my God. Log kya bolenge?
Yeah, right? Like, what will the neighbors say, right?
Yeah.
Like, Jesus Christ, bro. Like, just...
oh, man.
India. The diaspora immigrant life is wild.
Yep.
You know what's trippy, though? Like, when I was in Canada for the PPR, it felt like every minority position there was literally a Punjabi person. And like on the airport, in all the stores, everywhere I went to, I was just like, dude, this is like the literal most Punjabi place I've ever been to, short of New Jersey. And like,
wow.
Well, New Jersey's not really Punjabi because New Jersey's hella Gujarati, though. I remember I walked into a Dunkin' Donuts in like Edison once, and The entire transaction was done fully in Gujarati. The entire overhead, like Bina Ben, we need more coffee, was entirely in Gujarati. Every patron in there, I'm like, where the hell am I? This is still America.
Wow,
with
that's
Dunkin'
weird.
Donuts. It's like the most American thing.
Right.
It was so funny. It's wild. Like, I mean, here in the Bay Area, it feels more like Singapore than anything, just because there's everybody here. But like,
wow,
it turns out that Punjabi is like the largest ethnic group in Canada that's not Native American or Canadian or something like that.
I did not know that. Wow.
Yeah, I had no idea either. I'm like, that's wild. But anyways, yeah, like that's the thing, folks at home. If you run into an Indian outside of India, the chances are very high that they're either going to be Gujarati, Punjabi, or Bangladeshi, because of the fact that these are the three trader people who went out and hit all the corners and colonized everything. And then later on, the Tamilians and stuff showed up. But like, you can go to friggin' Iceland and find a Gujarati family running a motel and a curry. And it's like, what the hell? Like, dude, I don't know if you know this or not, but I'm sorry, folks. I promise this will be vaguely about magic. Maybe someday. I don't care. But in Norway, the number one pop music group right now in Norway is a group called Carpe, which is a rap group. And it's a rap duo, and one half of them is a half Norwegian, half Egyptian Arab guy, and the other one is a fully Gujarati dude named Chirag Patel. And I was like,
not what I would have expected.
You were telling me that the literal number one music group in Norway is a dude named Patel. Like, really? Norway? Norway! What are you doing in Norway? We don't belong in Norway.
That's wild.
And yet, like, I watched a whole ass documentary about this dude by Gujarati, in Gujarati, with subtitles in English, but I can speak Gujarati. Yeah. But I'm just like, what the hell is going on? And now, of course, every Gujarati parent in the world's like, oh, so you're not the best pop singer in your country, are you? I'm like,
right.
What do you want from me?
Right.
Oh my God. So you started exploring magic lately, or did you try it out when you were younger?
So I actually did try it when I was younger. I first tried it maybe when I was 10 or 11, when I first moved to the house where I'm at. Because somebody had like a yard sale and they were selling some, and I was like, oh, cool, I'll buy them. And I actually had some really good cards for that era, and I ended up doing what most teenagers do when Yu-Gi-Oh! And other game cards came out, where I threw the magic ones away or I got rid of them, and then I got into Yu-Gi-Oh! And I got really actually good at that. And then I didn't touch magic until my mid-20s again, and it was when they were doing like the 2018 box sets or something, or 2016 big box sets, and Commander had just started coming out with the Planewalkers and stuff, and there's a new play style, and I got into that, and I still have some of those decks. And then I let that go around 2018 or 19. I'd spent like $400 or $500 again, and got a bunch of starter decks and a few like those free duo ones. I know. I got off really light. I know guys who like spent hundreds of thousands and then ended up getting that back. One of my friends just sold his entire Magic collection, and he used to compete, and it was like worth $100,000, and he used it to fund his trip. He now lives in Australia or something. He like left America. Yeah. And he's like,
I know a lot of people who've bought houses and cars based on their Magic collection.
Yes.
And then a lot of folks like me who just kind of throw it away and then like, oh.
Yeah. Yeah. And then my girlfriend just got into it, so I just sort of got back in. I didn't buy myself any. I bought her tons. She's now like addicted to crack, and I have all the old ones I bought in 2016 or 18. I never got rid of those. This time I learned. So
I love that you call it old, like 2018. I'm like, dog.
All I know is I liked green. I liked smashing things. I love trample, and I like big hydras.
Fair. You know what? That is
smash.
That is fair and reasonable. That's a good place to be. Like, my son is also exactly there. He's just like, oh, look, I want to play hydras and dragons. And I'm like, well, they don't go together. It's like, make them go together. You know what? Reasonable. Why not? Like, there's no reason not to. It's like, there are plenty of hydras and dragons. Just throw them in the deck. It's fine. But yeah. He's like, just here's a Progenitus, put it on top. I'm like, all right, we'll make a Progenitus deck with dragons and hydras, sure. But yeah, like, what has it been like teaching a new person how to play if you're still new yourself?
I am still new myself. It's been definitely a lot of looking up the guidebooks online, going to like Magic stuff online, using the because she's playing the Magic, what is it, the Arena or something, the free online game, using that and like trying to sim part of our battle to see what she's allowed to do, and then know somebody who owns an actual Magic the Game shop in New York. another friend of mine who's a writer, turns out we used to be at the same agency, and he plays competitively. So I'm ashamed to admit, but I have been DMing him in the middle of match. I was like, hey, she just did this. What are the rules? And we'll both like lean over to my screen and like read his rules. Like, okay, cool.
Buddy, people have been DMing me Magic questions forever. They're like, hey, you know how this works. What happens when this happens? Because I used to be on the committee that helped run Commander. And so people will be like, hey, here's this very obscure situation with like 14 cards that do incredibly bizarre things. How does this work? And I'm like, this is where one of you concedes and we call it a day. But it's wild because like Magic is an insanely complicated game, and it's insanely well. I mean, that's why I'm like super excited for the thing is because it is a fantasy game that has lasted for 30 years. You cannot tell the same stories over and over again. So being able to broaden it out and be able to tell more different and unique stories is a big part of why I really still enjoy the game. Which is why like I was very excited when they asked me to like help them make the set more Indian vibe, and I'm like,
I hope they do more of that because we still have so much more that we could add to it. Like like
I mean, they've been doing a lot better job. Like they just had a set called Ixalan, or like what the hell they call like I don't know, Lost Caverns of Ixalan that just came out in a few months ago or earlier last year or something. And in that, it was based around Central American mythology, and the art director for that, a video went and like filled it with like Guatemalan symbolism and Mayan symbolism and like names and flavors and characters. And it's like, you can tell a story that is a fantasy story with this source material that makes it look sick without making it look like you're just copying someone's homework. You know, like I really asked them to put in a rickshaw car because it's a racing thing, and racing in a rickshaw would be funny as hell.
Oh my God, yes.
They did give me an ox cart, so I'm like, okay, I'll take an ox cart. That's funny. But like, there's just so much. Like, I'll show you some of the art later. They created a new style of Devanagari graffiti based on like North Indian alphabet. It looks so sick. It looks so cool, and it just I don't know. I think that there's so much interesting richness that could be delved into, and I'm glad that they're finally like asking us to share instead of just coming and doing bad Wikipedia research or whatever.
Because there's a number of diversity of creatures in mythology that came out of the region that other people know about or don't. And the myths that other cultures created, because most people don't know, it's not just so much wealth came out of India, but India had myths created about it from other countries.
Sure.
Like people don't know griffins are Indian, but it's because the Greeks created the griffin as a myth that they believed about India, whereas they thought that was a real monster that was there. Now it's very likely it was probably built off of the myth of what would be translated in English into straight Garuda.
Yeah.
And that might be where the actual myth came from for the Greeks. But griffins were not a creature that Indians created. But
no,
the Greeks created them, but they believed that they existed in India. So it's an Indian monster.
When you look at like the Arabian Nights folklore, and you see the story of Aladdin, for instance, and the story of Aladdin takes place in far off China, not because it's Chinese, but because that's far enough away that they can just be like, it takes place somewhere way the hell.
Yep.
But like, I mean, we see this in Magic too. Like, we've got the Serendib of Freestubber in the original set were taken from the island of Serendib, which is Sri Lanka. The Shivan dragons, who are like volcanic dragon based, literally from Richard Garfield's trip to Nepal, where he's seeing all those Shiva mandirs all over the place. And like, I don't know. I just think it's cool when like you could see the difference, for instance, between somebody who researches and studies and adapts the way, like he was like, oh, look, Shiva's a god of heat. So of course, these are going to be fire breathing dragons that live on mountains. Whereas people who just take cool names and ideas, Shiva's a blue thing that lives in ice. So we've got ice lesbian bicycles in Final Fantasy.
Yeah.
And it's like, oh, guys.
Yeah.
Give me more Shivan dragons and less Shiva bicycles. Yes. That's all I'm saying.
Or stuff to do with time and destruction and the idea of death, because you have also the Gori death priests and monks, who are also aspects of Shiva.
Yeah,
and that's something actually I'm working on. I'm actually building something off of that for a new book I want to pitch. That's going to do with death and time and localized Indian culture about river spirits. Because people don't know, we used to also have regional river deity worship that is unrelated to the idea of like Ganga, like the larger river aspect. There was also regional and smaller river body worship because that was a localized water source to you.
Did you ever read 9 Lives by William Dalrymple?
Yes, I think a while ago. I haven't read the new one that he's coming out with. I think
the new one was the Golden Road. I just finished it, which is another like 600-page novel. Not novel, but like researched history. Is super sick. It's like about India's spread out to Southeast Asia during the Silk Road era, and how its cultural hegemony kind of took over, like and going back and forth, and it's wild. It is so cool to read and see like some of the because. Trade is one of my favorite things in the world, and the Silk Road is one of my favorite things, and cultural transmission. Like, yes. I love, like, for instance, the fact that Alexander comes from Macedonia, invades North India, and invades all of everything, and is just like this horrifying, scary war beast who has come from the east, and his name becomes Sikandar in Punjab, and travels down India into this tales of like warrior and crazy, and becomes Skanda, the god of war, another name for Murugan. And I'm just like, what the hell?
And then that transfers to Buddhism because Skanda is in Buddhism as well.
Yeah, right. Like this guy's legend was so fierce, they literally turned him into the war god. And I'm like,
this is Thailand has versions of Raman as Ramakian or Ramakian in there, and how Indian transmission culture. We took over parts of Southeast Asia, parts of Cambodia and Vietnam, were parts of India at one point. And it was very weird, but China never was, and just how the trade of what materials and culture. Because in Tales of Tremaine, I actually use that same term, Golden Road. There's a lot of people don't realize that a lot of the things I put in there were actual old term names for actual places along the Silk Road, things that actually were culturally tied into real India, even though it's a secondary India.
I think you need to read Dalrymple's history. It's going to be edifying to you. Yeah, like it comes out in April in America. I bought mine from when I was in Spain, so it got the European.
Oh, the European, yeah, that's why I've been like stymied. I've been like publicly tweeting, sort of like vaguely, like, can somebody send me an arc like a publisher? Like, this is what I love and I write about. Can I get a review copy? And nothing.
Yeah, dude, I picked mine up in Europe because it came out last year in England, and my guru was there, so I flew it in Spain, and I was like, oh, while I'm here, I'll just grab this doorstopper, and it's amazing book. Like for instance, I mean, it's just trippy to me that Gujarati traders go back and forth to Arabia, and you see on the side, and like in Egypt, there is like a temple of Isis, and in this temple of Isis, there was a carving donated by Indian sailors, which has Krishna and Vasudeva as like, in the lintel of this Isis mandir, and I'm like, that's wild. That's so sick.
Yeah, the amount of Indian oceanic trade that people don't realize in the West is insane. Yeah. For the longest time, people used to think Damascus steel came from Damascus because of the history that the West only got so many Indian goods out of the Middle East because they never knew about India, because the Ottoman Empire eventually had such a lockdown controlled trade of it that they had to go around the Horn of Africa to find India. But when most people don't know, if you look up, for example, Damascus steel, it first came mostly predominantly from South India and Sri Lanka. But the Middle East was the port where most Europeans would go as far as they did. So to them, that's the first place they're finding these goods that the Middle Easterners are really getting from India. This was the same with certain spices and everything else. But then you start tracing them back and you're like, oh, that's weird. It really come from other places. It's just Western ideas is when this was first introduced to us, and that's what we're going to run with. And it's like, well, no, you need to go back further, or you're stopping the buck in the transmission of data and information shorter than it really was.
Yeah, but I mean, to be fair, India also got a lot of things from other people too. We got tea from
100%.
China.
yeah, 100%. Yep,
Every Indian in the world would be like dead without
tea. Yep. That's a funny story though, where because of what happened with tea, with how once the industry took off in Assam, how the watered down tea wasn't favored by the British, and that's why we started adding masala to it, because we were like, let's just figure out how to make this tasty, because we didn't know how the Chinese brewed theirs.
Right.
And then the Dutch actually liked that, because cinnamon and cardamom, a lot of the spices, for people listening who don't understand this, but if you like pumpkin spice is literally chai spice, 100% beat for beat. No, it is. And here, listen to this, because if you go, and I actually did a thread on this, the original pumpkin pie was a recipe from Dutch traders who used the chai masala spices in an early yam and pumpkin based pie. And then later the British adopted it into something called pumpkin pie, which then later became the official pumpkin pie in America. Chai spice blend, but if you look at it, it's chai spice.
Yeah, minus like black pepper. Yeah, basically.
Yeah, minus black pepper, but the cardamom, the cinnamon, all of it is straight up the exact spice order that we use in that, and they all come from India.
So what you're telling me is your pumpkin spice latte is literally just cha.
yes, it is. I mean, think about the spice blend in it. It is,
dude. I know you're
cinnamon,
not wrong.
Nutmeg, clove, allspice. Yeah, it's chai spice.
Yeah, I don't know. Just think. I mean, like that's the thing. One of the things I appreciate about that side of the world is how easily the back and forth trade went, and how people were just so open and accessible to bringing new ideas from here and there and whatever, and like, you know, just taking all these different cultural elements and blending them together into really cool things. That's just so much fun to me, right? Like that's
absolutely.
Sick. And yeah, I don't know. Like, I love that Dragon Ball Z is like the journey to West, which is just the story of Hanuman going, and it's like, okay, let's go, son.
Yeah.
It's like, yeah, I don't know. I mean, I love this stuff. I think it's sick, and like, it's wild because Japan has so much of like Indian DNA transmitted through the generations and stuff, and you see it show up in all the games and everything. And then,
like look at Naruto. The hand signs, that's mudras.
Well, yeah,
those are mudras, and then you have the breathing stuff. That's prana. Prana is the mystical art of like how you breathe. It's
basically yoga without the poses. Yes,
without the poses. Yeah, it's just breathing styles and breathing arts to give you not superpowers. I mean, I guess you could argue superpowers because the belief was that when you do those, you know, with the yoga, you would gain certain supernatural abilities.
Yeah, it's like
they just don't have any.
I mean, like, yeah, all of these like meditative ninja techniques and stuff come from, like, you know, samurai techniques, which come from kung fu techniques, which come from Bodhidharma, the South Indian Buddhist who was hanging out in a cave in the Shaolin area. It's like, it's just wild to think about, like, the fact that people would go and spend like 15 months to like 2 years just traveling back and forth, traveling to India, grabbing a bunch of books and going back to China, translating them and then translating them.
Oh, absolutely.
And it's just like, I don't know. I think that's so cool. Like, I think that's super sick. And like, everybody's like, oh, aren't you happy you had an India set? I'm like, no, I want a Silk Road magic set. I want a set where we've got cultural trading and transmission, which is kind of why I'm excited about this race car stuff. But yeah, I don't know, man.
I would kill to work on that, man. Just everything from all the Silk Road evolution, from what Buddhism spread, fighting monks. Oh my God, the different martial arts and language, the magic. All the weapons, there's like thousands of years of history I could just nerd out about. This is what I do for fun. It's all etymology. My entire wall is just all everything Asian Silk Road. Just
like, I mean, the things I care about, the Silk Road and the history of language evolution and the history of religious transmission and stuff, like folklore is like, that is my 100% jam. So I'm
yes.
I'm stoked for this. Like, I really want to read your book. I really do, because but I'm also kind of irritated because it sounds like a book I would have wanted to write. And now I'm like, well, what the hell, dude? I'm gonna just say, oh, you think you're that Virdi guy, huh? I'm like, yeah. But like, I've been working on this retelling of the Mahabharata for a long time, of the two families and of technology versus like spiritualism, and of like, you know, I think these stories have so much. They're so cool.
They are.
So many
the scope is insane, because like they also they posit at things that people are still getting at today. Because the South Asian myths had how the universe began with the cosmic heat, and now some scientists are arguing that is exactly how the universe might have happened, where it was this great expansive superheated gas that kind of like preceded that, and then. I know it's like reaching down. I'm not trying to justify the myth, but I'm saying it is kind of cool how there's something within the myths that still seem to be pervasive within our whatever we're looking at. Like the fact that the scope, I know people take this too far, that when the arrows and the missiles are blowing up in Mahabharata, they're like, oh, those are early nukes. But the fact that they had the scope to go like that something could blow up that big and be that fantastically cool, that's what I'm like, that the way that they wrote, their styles weren't like, oh, he just pierced him in the breast. It was like, no, he blew something up and it was awesome. Like
that's the thing. I think it's
their storytelling techniques were still like very evocative, and like they're still kind of, I don't want to say pulpy, but they have moments that like
they were nerds. They were nerds. Fantasy nerds, and they were telling really like, cool
this
stories.
Giant flying invisible chariot, and you're like, that's just cool. You don't. They're not. It's not the logic of it. It's just like it's magic, but this is cool. And they had just this scope. Like it was early opera. It really was. That's what it was. It was the early operatic, episodic, bombastic. You know, this is your tune in next week for the next episode of Dragon Ball Z.
Right, exactly. I mean, think about it. Right now in India, you can go to the small villages, and for instance, in Rajasthan, they have these things called these groups of people who will go around to the small villages and sing songs, set up a tent for 9 days, and have this huge giant tapestry called a FUD that stands behind them, which has every character on the story in it. And while the storyteller is narrating, he's got the stick and he's pointing to this guy and that guy.
Absolutely. And these techniques are in my book. So like Ari will perform using South Asian different narrative techniques. I've done threads on the different kinds. So in here, you'll also see I have references to Gari Lohar, because most people don't realize They're really famous in the West, but the idea of the tinker, the Ramani wandering people who would also tell stories, actually come from India. They were a group who was, unfortunately, due to prejudice and casteism, they left India. But Gadia Lohar are literally, it means wagon, iron wagon, because Gadia means vehicle. These were oxen-driven cattle cart guys who would go around and they would fix things with knives and pots and be pot menders or rumor mongers, and they would just travel in little carts that they would sleep in. They would have a little hutched home, and these are the predecessors essentially of the Ramani people who would be living in their wagon carts. And they come from India.
The Romani.
Yeah. And people don't know that, and they only ever just refer. And it's like, no, a lot of these people and cultures and tradition, and I include all these back to try to decolonize gets a very aggressive term, but I want to dial it back because a lot of people have only ever seen these in the Western iteration, and they think that they only exist in the Western archetype. And I'm like, you have to understand, these cultures have existed for thousands of years before they were transmitted to the West and before they evolved and spread. There are other versions of these I'd like you to see, either older versions or versions that have still existed and never been shown in fiction before.
Yeah. And that's the thing is, like, these cultures don't stop evolving, right? Like, so when the West or a different culture takes a story and ossifies it and makes it into part of their myth and their cycle of folklore, the culture that story came from did not stop, right? Like, they kept going, they kept growing, they kept evolving. We see this problem a lot with, like, for instance, Western takes on Christianity, looking at Judaism as if it ended when Jesus was born. But no, Jews still live. Their stories progress. They create their own whole culture. And, like, the Western idea is, like, the point where we take their thing, it no longer matters and they aren't a thing anymore. Yeah. And, like, that's just not fun or fair, right? Like, all of these other cultures have, like, for instance, I've been reading a Chinese serialized kung fu story called The Legend of the Condor Heroes.
Yes, by Jin Yong.
Yeah, dude, it rules. It ruled. It was written in, like, Hong Kong newspaper in the 50s and stuff, but it tells this whole lengthy folklore of evolved, like, storytelling of Chinese, like, cultural, like, kung fu and, like, the story.
Yeah, the wuxia genre. Yeah,
and it's like, oh, this tradition is still going and still strong even today, even though we look at it as one thing that existed at one point in time, then never again. And I think that's one of the real grand benefits of modern culture. The fact that we all can live here. We all can now finally speak English and share these awesome folkloric like histories that didn't stop with the modern day readers. And I think, because, like, that's the upside of reading fantasy and playing fantasy video games and card games and board game stuff. You'll read a word and you'll be like, what the hell is that? And then you'll look it up and then you will discover this whole culture you've never heard of. Like, when I was growing up playing D&D, and there was a spell called shillelagh, which is like, Irish, you summons this big club that you hit people with. And I was like, what the hell is a shillelagh or whatever? And then I look and I'm like, oh, now I know an entryway into Celtic folklore, and I've delved in, I've learned so much more. I just want to give people more footholds in, like, I'm like, this is sick. I want to share with you how sick this is. Come and let's sit down and let's share stories together. I think it's awesome. Yeah, man. I'm really, it fills me with a certain amount of pride to see you succeeding so strongly. Cause, like, your book got a ton of awards and was, like, very popular that year. And I was like, damn, dude. Hell yeah, let's go.
Thank you.
This is so sick. I'm so glad to see it. Are you working on book 3 now, or is that going to be like another 3 years? How long does it take you to write your first one?
The first one actually happened pretty fast, because at that time I was full time and the economy and the world weren't where they were. I had just transitioned from indie full time to writing that, and I had book 2 done before book 1 had come out. Book 3 I hadn't written yet because I'd seen a few pieces of advice which I took to heart, where book 1 had gotten through already editing, but they were like, don't rush to write book 3 because you don't know how much changes in book 2, which is exactly what happened. Because of COVID and everything that was happening when those books were coming out, paper shortage, like, utterly, like, whomped traditional publishing. So first we had to cut 70,000 words off my book 2, which is, like, almost the size of a normal novel. Because book 1 was 351,000 words. Book 2 was 450,000. It was another 100,000 words. So it was another novel larger almost. And they were like, we physically can't print this. So it went through so many delays of us going back and forth and cutting it. And then when we had the paper to print it, so the book came out late. It was originally supposed to come out 2023 in October, and it came out late summer last year. So it was delayed by almost 2 years because of paper shortages and release time, which threw off all the time of me starting book 3. And now we're going through everything we are now. I picked up a J job again. So I'm turning in book 3 this summer. So it should be out next year or 2027. So not actually too far off. It takes me about 6 to 8 months to write a book. But because of the time delay for this, what I did instead was I mostly just wrote book 3 on paper. So now I'm just transcribing it and rewriting it on PC. So it's not like I don't have the actual book of what I need to do. That's just gonna, because I had the time anyways. It was gonna pass. I just didn't know what exact beats would be cut out of two. Like, what am I gonna miss that I might have to patch back up and find a new way around?
Writing out longhand is wild.
But I had to do something. Otherwise, like, I'd be starting with zero, like no material, and that would make it so much longer, which would also delay when I get paid, because like I am relying on that income. Yeah. So it was like that. And then I also turned to writing a few other books. I wrote a thriller that's on submission right now based off of my experiences being first generation born here to the son of a cab driver. So it's following the idea of immigrant cab drivers dealing with DC when it was the murder and cocaine capital, because there was a history of, at that time, some cabbies would be abducted by gang members who, to avoid being racially profiled, they wouldn't drive their own cars. What they would do is probably better and safer. You're in the back of a cab because now you're a customer. No one looks in the back. And they would like tell a cab driver sometimes like, hey, do you want to make a lot of money? You can either eat this bullet or you can take us to a drug buy and, we'll sell whatever drugs we want, make our cash. And then they give him like a ridiculous amount. Like they'll give him 1 day's work of money, like in one ride. And the cabbie, who's an immigrant, is of course terrified. Like, can I go to the cops if I tell them I was technically party to this, even though I was a hostage? Will I get deported still? Like, they don't know what to do. And this was a real thing that happened. And that was another thing I worked on during that time that sort of delayed me on writing that. But
okay, so tell the people what your book is actually about, because we've talked around it a lot. So give me a capsule summary so that as we're wrapping this one up.
So the first binding and Doors of Midnight are following essentially like a living legend who has now like vanished from the world in disguise, and he's telling the audience his story. You realize he's sort of like a proto-hero, the way Odysseus and all the heroes along the hero's journey always have been. And now he's telling you the truth of how he became that person. He's essentially either the world's greatest hero or villain, depending on which stories you've heard about him in hiding. And now he's telling the audience, here's who I really am. Here's how I became this. So he's got a present day story where he's looking for something he thinks will save the world. And then he's got his past story of how he got to this point. How either he destroyed the world and nobody knows it yet, or how he's the greatest hero. You get to decide as you hear his legends unfolding as he's narrating to you.
That's sick, man. All right, cool. Well, this has been delightful, and I really appreciate you coming on. Like, I know you and I've wanted to talk to you for a long time because we've been like mutuals on Twitter for a while. I was like, I need to have an excuse. I need an excuse to talk to you. But this is sick, though. This was really, really fun.
Thank you.
Likewise. So if folks wanted to find you or read your books or anything, where could they go?
Just Googling RR Virdi will definitely pull me up everywhere. But Facebook at RR Virdi is easy. Right now, I'm probably going to be more active on Blue Sky than anything else. I don't know. Twitter just feels like there's zero reach. I'm seeing like some companies with like 300,000 followers get like 3 likes now. And I'm like, okay, dude, that place might be dead.
I've stopped posting my stuff there just because it was getting zero. It was getting absolute nothing. And I'm like, even the person who hates me the most would still generally throw a like somewhere. Like, it's weird. It's just completely
it's like, it feels like it's just dead. Like, either you have to be paying for it or be a bot or something. I'm like, it just doesn't make sense. So I'm definitely way more active on Blue Sky now, because even though it doesn't have the user base numbers, I'm noticing people's natural organic reach of like, if people follow you, they will genuinely see something you share. It seems like it's a lot more engagement based.
Yeah, it's a lot more fun too.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, usually fun. These days, maybe less fun. But that being notwithstanding, though, as always, my friends, you can find me at Shivam Bhatt on Blue Sky, or you can find this podcast wherever podcasts are sold, or at YouTube every Tuesday, thanks to my editor, Dan. You can also hear me on the Shivam and Wheeler Love Magic podcast, the Chronicles of Dragonlance podcast, I don't know, the Tap Concede for Aether Drift, whatever. I am very easy to find. I am very hard to miss. I'm loud. But in any case, my friends, it's not magic without the gathering, and we'll see you next time.